Hi there and welcome to one of the first Mint Twist tutorials. It's just a little tutorial to show you how to make a jQuery autosuggest, like the ones that you usually see on Facebook. I'll just give you a quick example here. So I start typing, I get these results. Facebook's probably coded it as custom, so it's probably not jQuery, but I'm going to show you how you can recreate this style using jQuery. Okay, so let's just set up our project. Okay, so first I'm going to make a new folder called PHP where my PHP is going to go. I just add the little underscore so that all the main folders get grouped together. Then a script folder for our JavaScripts. Within the PHP folder, we're going to make a folder. We're going to call it Ajax, which is where our Ajax calls are going to go. We're going to have a file. We're going to call it functions.php. We're going to have a file. We're going to call it config.php. Bear in mind that you don't have to follow this exact style. As long as the code is the same, you shouldn't have a problem. All this code will be available on the blog post as well as here. So we're going to add a new file within Ajax. This is going to be our Ajax call, so we're just going to call it autosuggest.php. That's the file that's going to be run when the trigger happens when you're typing on the text box. And then we're just going to have our main file index.php where we're going to be working on right here. So let's just put a little HTML title, but first let's just include our functions file. Let's say require. And now let's just have a little title in HTML. The greatest web design agency in the world. Okay, so let's just have another look at Facebook. So this is what we're basically going to recreate. This little text box right here. Let's just have another little look at Facebook. So this is basically what we're going to recreate. So you type and the results appear. So what are the main elements here? There's a text box. So we know that the text box, you definitely need a text box for the autosuggest, otherwise it's kind of blip. What else is there? When the results appear, there's obviously a container for all the results, and each result is in its own element as well. So we know that we need all of those things to actually make this autosuggest work. So let's flip back to our project, jQuery autosuggest. Right, so I'm just gonna add some CSS because I absolutely hate Times New Roman. So style. Well, might as well structure this. Alright, so HTML. Head. And then body. Anyone who knows HTML will obviously know what I'm doing here. If you don't, then I don't think you should be watching this tutorial. There we go. I'm just going to include the file I'm about to create, so main.css. Let's just include that here. Ooh. There we go. So now let's just change that absolutely ugly font. I'm not going to bother commenting either. You know what? I'm on a Mac. Helvetica. It is. There we go. Much better. Let's make this colour a little lighter. It's a bit too dark. Okay, that's practically the same. Much better. Yeah. A lot easier on the eyes. Right. Back to our index file. So let's just start by writing our form up. Well, it doesn't really have to be a form, so I'm actually not going to write form, I'm just going to write the input. Type text, obviously. Let's give it a name. Let's call it autosuggest. Let's give it an ID. And let's call that autosuggest as well. There we have our text box. Let's just give that a bit of styling as well, actually. So let's just give it some padding, 5 pixels. Let's give it a nice border. Ooh, not border bottom. I want a border all over. Let's make it a light grey. Sorry, I have the habit of always putting my hex colours in capital. It's kind of like a little bit of OCD. Background, let's make it white. Let's just check that that's visible. Okay, it's hardly visible. I'm going to make it just grey. There we go. Let's just make it a little bit wider as well. There we go. We have our text box. I'm just going to remove this outline. I absolutely hate the default outline. So there, that should remove it. Yeah, that's much better. Okay. So what's next? We got our little input box styled. So what is next on the list? Well, obviously, if we're going to have an autosuggest, we need to have a database. Or well, obviously the autosuggest can be pulled out from anywhere, but in this case we're just going to use a database. So let's just create our little database. For Mac users, this is SQL Pro, it's free. I know they say Pro, but it is free. So let me just create the table. Autosuggest, it's MySQL table, default encoding, UTF-8 Unicode. There we go. Let me create my table. So what am I going to be auto-suggesting? Let's see. What should we call it? Let's call it users. Okay. So we've got our users table. See the structure. ID, int, auto increment, make it the primary key. Oh, wrong. Let's add more table. Okay, so this is our users table. So our users table will have a name, what else might our users have? Our users might have an email address, so let's put email. And what else? And we might as well just have a date added. And let's make that a date time. If you have no idea what I'm doing right now, I suggest you stop watching the tutorial because you do need to know MySQL to do this part. Right, so we have our table, we have our fields. Let's add some content. So let's add a new row. Let's leave the field to generate itself. Let's add Andre Figueroa. Let's add Andre at minttwist.com. And I didn't know that in SQL Pro it didn't give you the option for the date. Let's just add it. So what is the format of date time? It is DMY. So what day is it today? Today is the 15th of Jan, so 15/01/2011, and the time right now is 12:03. Seems I did it in the wrong format. Let's just redo that. So the year is 2011, the month is the 1st, and the date is the 15th, and the time is 12:15. It's 12:04, sorry. Now you could do a bunch of things to this table, like you could index the name and the email if you want them to be searchable. It would make it quicker, but in this case I'm not going to. Also, I highly recommend that you use InnoDB rather than MyISM, as MyISM is no longer really being updated, and you can't do relations with MyISM, and you can with InnoDB. The collation, for those of you who are actually still learning, always use UTF-8 General CI. That lets you use all kinds of different foreign characters with no problem. Right, so we have our table. We have ID, name, email, date added. So those are the fields. So what's next? Next we have to create our function that will run every time a user starts typing. So what do? Well, first we'll need to create our script, then include our script in our HTML file. So let's call this functions.js. So we have our function, let's just include it. Script. You no longer need to add the type of JavaScript. So, I mean, if you have issues with that, you can obviously, but I personally don't include it. I realised that I've misnamed my folder, so I'm just going to rename that. Right, so what do we need to do now? Now, on our input, we're going to add an event handler. Which one is this going to be? You can use a bunch of different ones, but I find that one of the best ones to use when you're doing an autosuggest is on key press or key up. It doesn't really matter. You can really use any of them. So let's just use on key up in this instance. Then you need to reference it to a function that will run every time you type something in. Obviously, this is going to be done with jQuery. So there's one thing we definitely need, which is the script tag. So watch this magic. I'm going to do some magic, and it's going to magically appear there. Ta-da! You see that? You see how it just automatically appeared there? That's magic. Alright, no it's not. I just edited this video because I forgot to include jQuery. Well, you've included your jQuery, got your jQuery file. So, what are we going to do? Well, we need to write our function. As I was saying, our function, which is run on key up. So, let's go to our functions file. Start writing function. Let's just call it autosuggest. Okay, so we have our function. Right, there's many different ways of passing through there's many different ways of passing through what the user types in on the autosuggest box. But in this example, we're just going to get the value using a jQuery function. So let's start by getting the value. So var autosuggest value is so. If you do not know jQuery, I suggest you read up on jQuery before you attempt this because it can get a little bit confusing. So targeting that element, and that element we're going to use the val function, and that will bring the value of autosuggest, and it'll set it to this variable. So now we have the content of whatever the user types in every time that he presses a key, as this function runs every time he presses a key. So now we have the value, so let's just add just a small bit of validation just to check if indeed there is anything in the box. If there isn't, well, obviously we're not going to run the Ajax function. Okay, so if autosuggest file is different to nothing. Also bear in mind with this method makes a call every time that the user presses a key. So it calls the database every time that they press the key. So it's not the most efficient way. There are other ways of just getting the entire contents of the database and storing them and then searching through that. But again, you can learn that on your own. So here we're just saying if the autosuggest value from that input field is different to nothing, that means we're going to run the function. So we're going to use the jQuery Ajax function for this. So, and that goes like this: Ajax, $.ajax, pretty simple, isn't it? Don't you just love jQuery? Then you got the parentheses and the semicolon. Within the parentheses, you got the curly brackets, and that's it. And then you pass through your parameters. So, 2 parameters we're going to be using in this instance. You can use more. There are on fail parameters, on complete, that kind of stuff. Actually, I'm not sure if there are on complete. I'm not exactly sure. You can check out on the jQuery website. They've got tons of documentation on all their functions, so it's very good if you want to learn how to code jQuery. But we're only going to be using the URL and the success parameters. So the URL, that's basically the URL that you're going to call with Ajax. And what else is there? There's the success. So on success, do this. So on success, we're going to run a function. This function is going to contain the result. This result is passed through by this function. That's the only way this will work. So this result is being passed through by this actual function. So right, and then so success function result, do this. So for the moment, let's just do return result, and that's it. So Ajax, la la la. So what's next? So we've got our input field. We've got our function. We've got our function. We've got our input field. We've got jQuery included. We've created our PHP. We've got our config file. We have our Ajax file. So we need to just quickly code up the PHP. So where we're going to start from, we're going to start on the config file, where we're going to include the variables to connect to the database. So just going to use constants. Actually, no. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to just use regular variables. So it'll be host. So this will be localhost. Then user. This will be. Okay, I'm not exactly sure what my user is. We'll just try this out. And password. And I think for my local machine it's that. And then what we need is the DB name. So DB name. Which I've already created. Which, what is it? What is it? Autosuggest. There it is. This is very simple PHP. So now I'm just going to create the connection here as well. There are many, many different ways of connecting. So don't feel the need of doing my way. Because as I said, this is just a temporary method. So host. You can check out the MySQL connect function on the PHP website. Again, they also have tons of documentation, which is great if you want to learn how to code. And let's just add this little function here, which presents our message if it fails. Very simple. So notice that we're just using the regular MySQL connection rather than the persistent one. This one slightly better. Like that, you don't always have to close it. It closes automatically the connection to the database server. Okay, so we have our config. Now let's just go to our functions file. Again, remember, you don't have to do this in the exact same way. I just prefer to have a structured approach. So we have our functions file. In our functions file, we're going to require our config file. So let's require that. And notice how we're not going to include the Ajax file because we're not going to call that Ajax file here. The Ajax file is going to call one of our functions. So our function, let's just write it here. Let's call it autosuggest. And here we are going to pass through the variable because it's being passed through the JavaScript. I'll explain in a little moment how. So let's just put query. Okay, so let me just go over again the flow of how this is going to work. So let's assume everything is already in place and all the code is written. Text box is here. The text box has a key down event handler which runs a JavaScript function every time that a user presses a key. So on pressing this P, my JavaScript function, which I have called autosuggest, would run. The value would be passed through into this variable. If the variable isn't empty, then the Ajax function will run this PHP file, Ajax, which will run this function. And the results from this function will be passed through in this result variable, which we can then dynamically add to the page using jQuery. So let's just keep going. Hope you don't lose me. Just rewind it if you do get a little bit lost. Okay, so let's just quickly write our function. This will be the text inputted through the field on the index page. So let's just quickly write our function. Right, so let's just write our query first. Select. What are we going to be displaying? We'll display the name and the email. So let's write. Actually, you might want everything really, except for the date time. So let's select the ID, the name, and the email from autosuggest. So your table. Now, where name like, we're using the like operator so that we can match it to something within the so we can match the whatever's in this query variable. You know what, let's change the name of this query because it gets a bit confusing to SQL. So we're going to match the result of name to the query. So we're going to say where like, and then we're going to have two percentage signs either side, and then we're going to include our variable. Like that. So that will match whatever is typed into name. And we're just going to write the exact same thing, but for the email. So and Actually, no. Let's do or. You can do and, or you could do or, but that will match both of them. So or will be if they type in an ampersand, and then it will remove everything if they haven't typed it, if it hasn't got an ampersand. So let's just do email like query. So that will compare the name and the email field to the query, which is inputted by the user. Right, so we're going to need to run this query. So let's make a variable, call it result equals MySQL query. And what's going to be done here? So we need our SQL. First we need our connection. One very important thing. Always remember to sanitize your inputs if it's going to interact with the database, and it's a very important thing to do, because otherwise, you could get someone do something nice like drop, but an SQL injection, they're not nice. Right. Let's just sanitize this. Right, so we've got our config variable included, and let me just remove this. That was just a little test. Okay, so what we're going to do is type in our variables, which will be contained in this case, just for simplicity, constant. So there's going to be host. So this will be localhost. Actually, I'm just going to add db to the end. db host. We're going to have a few others, which are going to be your user to connect to the database. Password for that user to connect to the database, and the database name. So database name in this case is autosuggest. Password is root for me. I don't know what it is for you. And it's root. And don't be trying to hack anything of MintTwist, because this is my local stuff. So yeah. And that's it. That's our database details. We're not going to be doing the connect there, we're just going to make it simple. So here, let's write our SQL. I'm just going to call it SQL, so it's distant query equals. So what we're going to do is match up our query to our fields and the two fields, name and email. So select, and also we're going to need the ID in case you need to use it in, if you're using this drop menu to categorize or as a link. So name and email from autosuggest, where name like, it's very important, and then you add 2 percentage signs, and within those 2 percentage signs you add your variable, and that will match query to your name. Or email like, and that will match your email. So now again, just 2 percentage signs, and there we go, and that will be our query. Next, what we need to do is obviously sanitize this, because otherwise someone could do an SQL injection. So what we're going to do is connect to the database real quick. And what we need for that is the DB host. We need the DB user. DBS user, no, just DB user. And we need the DB pass, and that will create our connection. Let's just add that as well. So that's our connection to the DB. We need to select our database. So let's select our database. So what we do is the DB name, and then our connection. Okay. Might as well add. Bear in mind that we're just keeping this simple. So we have our connection, we've selected our database. So next we need to add the sanitization. Remember, you can only use this function, MySQL real escape string, if you have an open connection to the database. Otherwise it won't work, and you'll end up with an empty variable. There you go. And now that sanitizes, and it will basically just escape your string, so that SQL injections aren't possible. So next thing we want to do is run this query. So let's create a variable called result, and this is going to contain the results of that query. So it's going to be MySQL query. It's going to contain our query. It's going to be connected to our connection. Right. Next, once you have the results, you need to iterate through those results. So we're going to do that with a while loop. It's going to be while row equals MySQL fetch associated, and you give it the result from the MySQL query. Then do so and so. So in this case, we're going to create a variable, call it items, and this is going to be our container, like in Facebook. Let me just show you again. So this will be our container here that contains all our results. It's the container. So we're going to, in this case, going to put it in an unordered list, and you can give it a class, whatever you want. Let's call it autosuggest, and then we'll style it a little bit. And right at the bottom, let's add the closing tags. Here we're going to have added within the loop, so you need to have the dot equals so that it appends to it, the variable, rather than overwriting it. Close the tag. Right. So we're going to iterate through each result. So for each result, we're going to add to the items variable, dot equals. You won't get the error because you've set the variable here. And there we go. So in the unordered list, we're going to have list items. So li, closing li. Okay, and then you can add a tags, but again, for the sake of simplicity, we're not going to add any a tags. It's just going to be the ul and the li with the contents of the results, obviously. Okay, so I'm going to display the name and with a little hyphen then the email. So let's just put our name. So all of the results are going to be stored in here in our row variable. So to get them, just got to get them out like you would with any other array because it's being stored as an array. So that will be name. And here we'll put email. Do remember that I mentioned that you do need to have experience in basic PHP and basic JavaScript to really understand this. If you don't, then you could always just learn a little bit and then come back to this, because this is actually quite simple. So we've got a list item with the name and the email of the row, and that's it. It loops through for every result. It'll just add it here, and at the end of the loop it will add the closing tag. And then what we want to do is just return the result, return the item, sorry. Okay, actually in this case we'll echo the items. It'll be a little bit easier. We just want to echo the items. Okay, so what if there are no results in the database? What if there's nothing that matches what the user wants? So that's very easy to overcome. So what you need to do is find out how many results there are. So you can do that. Just write a variable, call it total rows, and there's a MySQL function, a PHP function, sorry, MySQL num rows. Tells you how many results there are for your query. And then you can add a small if statement saying if total rows less, let's say more than 0, then run function, run this. Actually, what we can do is use the same variable, the items. Actually, let's add this here. We can use the items variable and just return a different message. So we can write items equals no results found. Sounds like something phone jacker guy would say. Alright, no results found. That's it. That's our function. If it doesn't work, I apologize. I promise I'll edit it and magically make it work and tell you how I did it. But it should work without a problem. So, let me run through the flow again so you don't lose me. User types something in. Event handler runs a function. That function is our JavaScript function. It runs a PHP file, this autosuggest file, which in turn runs this PHP function, which returns the results. Well, it prints out the results, and the Ajax function captures them and returns them in a JavaScript variable. So let's just add the URL now here of our PHP function. So it's in the PHP folder, in the Ajax folder, and it's called autosuggest.php. But I'm going to show you something now, which is very important. Let's just write our Ajax PHP function. So to actually run the function, we need to include the actual variable. So to actually run the function, we need to include our functions file. So we're just going to include that. So we just need to go up one, functions, PHP, and then just run our function. Ajda, what is it?
It's in casa.
Okay, so you call your PHP function. Right, in this function we need to pass through the user input. So how are we going to do that? In our functions.js file, our JavaScript functions, we need to add a get variable. So there are a few ways of doing this. Some by using the Ajax functions parameters, but again, for simplicity, because I love simplicity, Mr. Simplistic, we're just going to add it on the URL. So we're just going to write query equals, and then we're going to append the autosuggest val to that. So, and that's it. And that will run that and set the query get variable. So people who know PHP, all you need to do here is get the get variable, which is query. And that's it. And can you see how it all links up? If you can't, run the video again, because it's quite simple. Pay more attention. Yeah, and that's how it all links up. Right, so what is next? Right, next, on success. What do we do when this function succeeds? We have the results, but there's one final step to actually getting it on the screen. Like so. Let's do it. So, this is just JavaScript from here on in. We're going to have a div. We're going to give it an ID of autosuggest container. Let's just copy this. Autosuggest container. Doesn't appear on screen. It's got no styling. Just needs to be there, so we have somewhere to add our results. So here, let's just remove that. You need to target that element using jQuery. Well, obviously you can use regular JavaScript, but since using jQuery, why not use the jQuery function? It's a little bit easier. The dot HTML result. If you have no idea what that does, again, check the jQuery website, tons of documentation. HTML result. That basically adds the results to the autosuggest container. Alright, so this function is run every time a key is pressed. And there we go. But if I type anything else, no results found. How about we add some more content? Let's just add Right. Now, let's test that out again. See that? How cool is that? And there you go. That is how you make a jQuery autosuggest. Let's just style it so it looks a little nicer. Alright, so it's class autosuggest. So let's just make that. Let's give it display block. Let's give it no margin. Let's give it no padding. Let's give it no list style. Let's give it a border 1 pixel solid. Let's make it grey. No bottom border. And this no border bottom is for a reason, you'll see why. Let's just copy that. Let's add li, doesn't have that. Let's have 5 pixels of padding. Don't need margin, we want it to display block. We want to give it a border bottom of 1px solid. Let's remove that. And now let's also add a nice little hover. Background. And let's just make that, no, it's too dark. Let's make it light grey. And let's try that out. Lovely. But now it's a little bit too big, isn't it? So to stop that 100%, you can add float left to the actual UL. And now it should just, yeah, that's right. Let's make the text a little bit smaller. Let's add a little bit more padding. Let's give it a fixed width. And let's make it a pointer. And there we go. Obviously, if you've got things below and you just leave it like that, it's going to overlap. It's not going to overlap them. So what you need to do is give it position, absolute. You need to give it an outrageous Z index if you want it to always be on top. But in this case, let's just add 99. And now, if you have anything below, this will it will overlay it. So there's no worries there. And let's just yeah, that's it. And let's just give this a margin of 0 as well, the input. There. Now you can just give this minus margin of 1 pixel, and that liney thing will go away. There we go. Let's actually make it the same width as the box. How it is. So the difference is the padding. It's the difference by 6 pixels there, so it makes it by 2, meaning that should make it fit. Yeah, there we go. And that is how you write a jQuery autosuggest. Thanks for watching. Check out minttwist.com. We're going to be redoing our site pretty soon. And we've also got minttwist.pt coming soon. And we're going to have a whole little play area, and we're going to be showing off a little bit more what we can do, because we've done some pretty epic stuff, I must say. And yeah, stay tuned. This has been Andre for MintTwist by MintTwist. And the source files for this small little project are all available on the blog post. Just check them out. We'll be adding it to GitHub as well, probably. There's probably no need. And the source code will be displayed on the actual article itself if you need it. Thanks for watching and take care.